PR and WB. To put it simply, the cubing community is divided. PB is a term that we used to use to mean your personal best at home or just in general, and we also used official PB to mean what's your best in competition. PR stands for personal record, which actually matches what we do for other things officially, such as national record, continental record, world record. So record means it's official in competition, and best means it didn't have to be in competition. So that all seems fine until you look at UWR, unofficial world record. Well, it wouldn't make sense to say unofficial and record at the same time because record implies that it is official. So instead of unofficial record, we just say best like we do for personal best. And that's where world best comes from, WB. So why is the cubing community divided? That's because we've been using terms like official PB and UWR for a long time, and whenever you try to change what people have been doing for a long time, they don't want to change. Now for me, I don't really care which way you express it because I understand you either way, so that's why I don't think it really matters. But if we had to restart cubing with no tradition involved, I would say that obviously using record versus best to distinguish official and not official is the superior way to go. But just because it's better in theory doesn't mean it's better right now, and that's because if you say PR or WB, there are people who won't understand you and you'll have to clarify yourself anyway. Maybe in the future, if we all adopt this, it will be better, but right now, in the current circumstances, it's not always better. But hey, as a descriptivist, I tell you how things currently are. On the other hand, a prescriptivist would tell you how things should be. And for me, instead of the way cubing terminology should be, I find it more interesting to look at how cubing terminology evolves over time. Drew parity and Lucas parity. On 4x4 and up, if you get a flipped edge in the last layer, then you do the OLL parity algorithm. There are generally two very popular OLL parity algorithms, and the first one is called Drew parity, which goes like this. And the second one is called Lucas parity, which goes like this. As for which one is faster, I find that more people I talk to tend to prefer Lucas parity, but I'm not completely sure if it's really the more popular one. So both of the parity algorithms will flip these two edge pieces, swap these two corners, as well as change their orientation. And that's all that Drew parity does, but Lucas parity also swaps these two edges. So because they're a little bit different, with Drew parity, in a case like this where you just have to flip the edge, you can do it by doing R prime first and then doing Drew parity. And then U2 afterwards and undo the R, and then that solves it. With Lucas parity, you can't do the same thing because if you start with R prime, these two edges are going to switch, which means you're going to unsolve F2L if you had done that exact same setup. So one disadvantage of Lucas parity is if you want to learn OLL skip tricks like this, you have to do extra moves. So this case would be done like this. R, U, R prime, F prime, and then go into Lucas parity. And then undo those four moves, and that solves OLL. Here's another example with OLL skip where you have to do it differently for Drew parity and Lucas parity. So for Drew parity here, you can do B2, R2 followed by the parity algorithm, and then U2 followed by undoing those setup moves. With Lucas parity, the setup is one extra move, so R2, B2, R2, and then undo the setup. Mod. A mod is just any change you make to the puzzle, whether it's to the hardware or whether it's to how you end up solving it. In speedcubing, this used to be a really big deal as hardware was not quite as optimized, and once people bought their cubes, they found a way to make them even better afterwards. For example, with the Diane Zanchi, which was the best 3x3 for a long time, people found that sanding down parts of the pieces would make the performance better. Also, big cubes like the V-Cube 6 had specific ways they had to be modded in order to make it not lock up quite as much. And I can tell you personally that even on a modded V-Cube 6, this thing is a loud, clunky piece of garbage. Counting. So I don't mean counting like 1, 2, 3, but we use this in the context of an average. So in competition, when we do an average of 5, then the worst and the best solves get dropped out of the average. So it doesn't even matter how good or bad those ones are. All that really matters is the 3 in the middle. So the 3 times in the middle are called the counting solves because those are the ones that count. Trigger. A trigger, not to be confused with, is a sequence of 3 to 4 moves that come up very often that make it really easy to memorize algorithms. For example, this OLL shape where the bar here is on the right side, if you hold it like this, then it's only 3 simple triggers. R, U, R prime, U, and then the other way, R, U prime, R prime, U prime, and then sledgehammer, R prime, F, R, F prime. So this F12 case is done with RU to R prime, which is one trigger, and then U, and then the trigger RU prime R prime. So if you try any of these triggers on a cube, you may see a pattern. Examples like RU R prime, or RU prime R prime, or RU to R prime, or sledgehammer, R prime F, R F prime. All they really do is take an F12 pair out. And then we'll typically do other triggers to put the F12 pair back in. And then that's how a lot of algorithms are formed. So if you learn a bunch of these different triggers and use them to memorize algorithms, it can make memorizing some algorithms a lot easier. RU to R prime, sledgehammer, RU to R prime. Unofficial events. Unofficial events are things that you do that are not held in competition and don't have official results attached to them, but are fun enough that people tend to still do them. So here are all of the official events, and they come in two different forms, which is either different puzzles, like 3x3 or Megaminx, or there'll be different ways to solve puzzles, like blindfolded or one hand. So in unofficial events, we also have these two categories. For different puzzles, basically just any twisty puzzle you can think of, which could include things like Minx, Fisher Cube, Ready Cube, Rubik's Magic, which used to be an official event for some reason. And then of course there's the other category of solving things differently. So this can take so many forms because you don't need a new puzzle, you just need whatever you have plus some creativity. So some popular examples include Team Blind, which is one person being blindfolded and the other person telling them what to do. Team Factory is another really fun one, where each person does one step and then passes the cube down to the next person. You'll find this happening very often at competitions when people are just hanging out at a table. Now there are a ton more here that I won't describe, but I'll just list out. There's Mini Guildford, Relays, 2 People 1 Cube, Rob's Challenge, Sail Challenge. You could even come up with a new one that's way more fun than any of these. Full Step. If a solve is full step, that means you didn't skip any steps. A fun fact is people used to commonly say non-lucky, or NL, instead of full step. But you could get lucky in different parts of the solve and not skip steps, like if every F12 pair was only 3 moves, that's pretty lucky, but it's still full step. So that's why everyone now pretty much just uses full step, because it's a more true description of what actually happened in a solve. Edge control. If you're more advanced at F2L, you can pay attention to the edges that are oriented on top, because ideally you want them all to be oriented when you get to the last layer so that you get an easier last layer case. So the most common way of inserting a pair is just like this, which may or may not leave you with a good OLL case. But if you see that these two edges are oriented, then you can do a sledgehammer, which is the most common way to do edge control. Now, edge control doesn't always mean you're making a cross on top. It could mean you're trying to prevent dot cases as well. So if you get this case and you see a dot, then if you insert that with a sledgehammer, then that makes it no longer a dot case, which tends to be better. Abbreviations. So just a quick difference between abbreviations and acronyms. Acronyms take the first letter of each word and you just use that. So OH means one hand. Abbreviations are different because they're just a shortened version of the word and it doesn't have to be shortened in that specific way. BLD is short for blind or blindfolded. BLD does not mean BLD, just like F2L doesn't mean F2L. Memo is short for memorization for blindfold solving. Com is commutator, used in blindfolded and FMC. X-cross means extended cross, so just build a cross plus one F12 pair as fast as you can. And it's not this. This is not an X-cross. And lastly, redux is short for the reduction method for big cubes. Corner cutting. Corner cutting is just when the cube's not fully aligned and you can still turn it. And there's two types of corner cutting. Regular corner cutting is when you start the corner cut, a hole appears right here. And that's how you know it's a regular corner cut. A reverse corner cut is when one piece has to slide off a centerpiece like this. Typically on cubes nowadays, 45 degrees is still a regular corner cut. If you go slightly past that, you can still maybe do a regular corner cut. If your cube's really good, you can go way past that. And then if you go even further, then you'll start doing reverse corner cut. So typically when this lines up with approximately 2/3 across the center, or maybe 3/4, then it starts to reverse corner cut. CO, CP, EO, EP. C means corner, E means edge, O means orientation, and P means permutation. So based on that, you can figure out what each of these mean. So when you get to last layer, no matter what method you use, those are the 4 things that you are solving. You just might combine some of those steps. So as an example, with 4 look last layer, that would go like this. You start by doing EO, or edge orientation, which gets all the edges on top to be facing up. Then you do CO, or corner orientation. Then you do CP, or corner permutation, which puts all the corners in the right spot. Then you do EP, or edge permutation, and that puts all the edges in the right spot. Now, if you think about this a bit, what OLL does is it combines the orientation steps. PLL combines the permutation steps, which makes last layer only done in 2 algorithms. Flagship. This is not specific to cubing, but generally when a brand is trying to sell a certain product the most, as in this is their signature product, then that's called their flagship product. So it's good to know and have tried some of the flagship cubes from different brands in order to know what kind of feeling you can expect from that sort of brand and what the best cubes are on the market. So this is different for different areas, but I'm just going to use 3x3 as an example. The biggest brands in 3x3 are Qi, Moyu, Gan, and Yushin. Each of their flagship products are the Qi Valk 3 and Valk Power, the Moyu GTS2 and GTS3, the Gan Air SM and the new Gan Air X, and the Yushin Huanglong. These are typically their newest and best cubes. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new, and be sure to check out part 1 and part 2 of this series, which I'll link in the description. Special thanks to my $5 and up patrons on screen here, and if you want to support cubing content like this, then you can go to patreon.com/jperm. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.